Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth,
I'm Ariana.
and we are back after, I think it was about a 2-week break. We took off doing some dog sitting. A little later, we're going to be talking about Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. But first, we're going to be doing our review of a movie I think we've been waiting on for over half a year. It came out in December. The Boy and the Heron, Hayao Miyazaki's latest and allegedly final movie.
He
But-
keeps saying that.
Well, we'll talk about like him in retirement here. So, The Boy and the Heron is about Mahito, a young 12-year-old boy who struggles to settle in a new town after his mother's death. However, when a talking heron informs Mahito that his mother is still alive, he enters an abandoned tower in search of her, which takes him to another world. It's also a historical period piece set during World War II.
Yes.
Before we get into this movie specifically, let's just kind of talk about our history with Hayao Miyazaki. We have not seen all of his movies, but I think we've seen the majority of his movies. Are there any of Miyazaki's films that stand out to you more than others?
Obviously Spirited Away, but I feel like Spirited Away was the one that like captured a lot of the American audience for the first time. Like took a firm grip.
I think like Disney actually promoted that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Howl's Moving Castle I like a lot. I know that that's not really one of your favorites.
Yeah, I'm a big Howl fan. Though I think this movie and Howl have a lot in common.
Yes.
But we'll talk about, there's a lot of links.
And Kiki's Delivery Service,
Mhm.
always a good one. Which one are your favorites?
I think Spirited Away is always really good. I really do enjoy Ponyo. I think it's a genuinely funny movie. And it's a movie that like, be a fun movie to watch with like a little kid, like a preschooler or kindergarten age. But Princess Mononoke was the first Miyazaki movie I ever saw.
Yeah.
I saw that in the theater with friends. I think it was freshman year of college. It had gotten released in the US. And I just remember somebody had brought their child to the theater and was sitting at a few rows in front of us. And in the opening, Ashitaka, the main character, like beheads some bandit that's trying to attack him. And I just remember hearing that little kid in the front yell, "That guy's head just fell off." And my friends and I just erupting into laughter because we were like, who brought their kid? Like, this movie's like PG-13. It's not a Disney animated movie. But yeah, a big fan of Miyazaki's work. Even some of the like the lesser films like Whisper of the Heart, which was more of just like a slice of life kind of movie, was still very good. And very well animated. I don't think there's a single Miyazaki film I would say looks bad.
Yeah, like there's the Cat Return. I think we watched that.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that one.
It wasn't too much. It was more like something that I feel like I would have rather watched in pieces versus a whole thing.
Or something like Arrietty that's based on The Borrowers, where you're like, it's fine. But like, we haven't seen things like Porco Rosso, which I've heard mixed things about. There's Castle in the Sky, I've heard is pretty good. But we've seen most of his films. What were your initial thoughts of The Boy and the Heron?
I think it's a one that I'd have to rewatch to get more of appreciation about it, especially when it comes to the link of World War II.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of cultural stuff that doesn't necessarily translate directly. And you kind of do have to do some legwork, some background work. What did you think of the animation in this film?
The animation was beautiful. I think the animation was to the point that he was pushing a little bit, especially with like the stuff with the fire.
Yeah, because that film opens with the fire.
Yeah, it's like this blur motion that is not. He's not trying to make it exactly beautiful. He's trying to make you feel devastated. It almost like overwhelmed by the fire.
Well, it felt to me like he really leaned into the impressionism aspects, because you're talking about it's a very elemental movie. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of fire, because there's a lot of birds in the movie, so that in turn shows us there's like a lot of wind. And yeah, it's an interesting film And I also think like that animation, to me, I would almost argue it might be one of the best animated films of all time.
Yeah.
Because it's clear that he's blending some computer animation in
Yeah, but
very sparingly.
yeah, very it's more like to get depth out of certain scenes. It's used at the beginning without being to the point that you're completely distracted by it.
Yeah. It caused the film to have this sense of motion that I don't associate with other Ghibli movies. Like I don't think I've ever seen a Ghibli movie where characters moved in such a fluid way,
Yeah.
or that he leaned into abstraction. The film it actually reminded me the most of is not a Miyazaki movie, but it's still a Ghibli movie, and it was Mura or as a Joe Hisaishi, I think is how you say his name, who's the co-founder. But his film, The Tale of Princess Kaguya,
Mhm.
which was done in kind of that watercolor style
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
felt more abstracted than a lot of Ghibli movies, and this had those traits in it. Uh, very aesthetically pleasing, even if you don't fully get everything in the narrative.
Yeah.
There's still like so much to enjoy on screen.
Yeah, there's little details that it's again, it's almost like a maximum version of what you would get sometimes with the Pixar or Disney movies. A lot of times it feels like the animation is so much simpler when you compare it to this style of movie. Like your
Yeah.
eye can wander to some point because it feels like a painting.
Well, it reminds you of the craft of 2D animation, that it is, whenever it's done really well, it blows 3D animation out of the water, in my opinion, because it takes something that is flat and gives it depth as opposed to something that is creating an optical illusion of depth intentionally. And with this, it kind of shifts back and forth between the look of a Ghibli movie and then those, especially if you want the fire scenes, are
Yeah.
so impressive. Uh, I think it makes contemporary American animation look like lazy swill in a lot of ways. Because compare something like this to Minion movies or Despicable
Yeah,
Me.
that's why I said like it seems so much like American animation films feel so much simpler in comparison to this.
When it also, Miyazaki's not trying to sell products. There's not, I mean, I'm sure there's merchandise, but that's not going to be a big money making
Yeah, I
thing for
really
this.
don't think
Like
that
kids
the
don't
gray
want the,
heron is gonna like
yeah.
is going to be a little stuffy that people are
But that
gonna
would be a
want.
pretty awesome stuff. You think you open it up and you pull the little man out from inside the heron. Which speaking of that, the physicality of the heron is so great
Yeah, it is. It's so fucking bizarre. It is so weird.
because the heron in this movie is a supernatural being. And so when he becomes injured and he can't fly, he basically kind of upchucks this little man that lives
Yeah.
inside of his stomach, who is the heron as well. Like it's a very, it feels like a Japanese fairy tale. Like that's the
Yes.
kind of thing. The characters feel very archetypal. Like, oh, I don't think this is the only place these characters appear.
Yeah, kind of like my neighbor Totoro of just being like, "Hey, you fall into the Fey realm," kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. And then we'll talk some about some of the performances here. We watched the American dubbed version, and normally with anime, I try to do just subtitles. But the voice cast here had me very interested, particularly one performance.
Yeah.
And that would be the Gray Heron, who is voiced by Robert Pattinson. And he gives a performance that is completely unrecognizable.
Yeah, it's to the point that I wouldn't have you. At no point did it sound like him.
It sounds more like he's kind of making a reference to Gilbert Gottfried as Iago in Aladdin, right?
That's a pretty good reference.
But then putting his own spin on it.
Yeah.
And it is one of the few instances where we have a typical, live action actor give a genuine voice acting performance.
Yes.
This is someone who has crafted a character and is giving them a voice that's not just them, as opposed to like Chris Pratt as Mario or something. Or even Robin Williams in Aladdin was just playing a version of Robin Williams, right?
Yeah.
And it's very rare that when they do that kind of stunt casting, like they put a big name in the title, that you go, oh wow, like I can't recognize their voice. You think of something like Mark Hamill, who's in this movie. He's really just kind of doing old Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
even though he has done a lot of voice acting before. Or like Florence Pugh, she does some voice acting because she plays the old woman and the young woman version of her character.
Yeah.
So as the old woman version, that's where the voice acting is happening. And then when our main character Mahito meets her in the past, it sounds a little bit more
Yeah.
recognizable as Florence Pugh. I also noticed in looking. Oh, and then talk about noticeable. Dave Bautista as the Parakeet King. It didn't
Yeah.
even feel like he was trying. It just
It
felt like.
felt like it was fine. It was exactly what you needed. You don't need much about for that character.
Well, then we also have Christian Bale as Mahito's father,
Yeah.
and I think he does okay. There's not much in that role.
Yeah, there's not, I mean, there's also several other names that do not get any like
Well, like Willem Dafoe has one scene where he plays a pelican, and he does a great job with it, but it was very obviously Willem Dafoe. But yeah, it's that Robertson Pattinson performance that
it was
makes the
really
movie. That
good.
makes the movie. Um, it feels like a movie because we were talking about Miyazaki having retired previously. And I think the last Ghibli film he directed was As the Wind Rises, which I have not seen, and is a biographical film about a Japanese aeronautics engineer.
Mhm.
But it also kind of touches on the way Japan abused and essentially enslaved a lot of Korean people.
Yeah.
And it's very like critical of Japan. And that was supposed to be
His
his
last.
final film. I think it was like 2017-ish, somewhere around there. And he came back, and this was based on a novel. And he was originally going to use the novel's title, but then they changed it to The Boy and the Heron. Title of the novel is How Do You Live?
Okay.
Which is a question that the granduncle asks Mahito near the end of the movie, I think. Uh, and there's a lot about this movie that feels as if he is making subtle callbacks to his old movies. It makes me think of the fantasy backyard of Totoro
Yeah.
or the wonderland nature of Spirited Away
Mm-hmm.
or the transformative magic in Howl's Moving Castle, how magic would like change people in one form to another kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And it feels like he's infusing this movie with everything. And my theory is that he made this movie about himself and the end of his time with Studio Ghibli. He is the grand uncle, and the tower is Studio Ghibli. And every day he has to do something to keep it going.
Yeah.
And he's looking for an heir, which leans into some uncomfortable stuff because his son has also tried his hand at directing animation and Hedwig and the Something. It was a film I did not hear many good things about.
No.
And apparently his son screened the movie. Hayao Miyazaki came to attend the screening, left before the movie was over, and then later told his son that he was disappointed in him and he just shouldn't make animation anymore. Like, and
Ooh.
he's known for there was a documentary we need to watch at some point where they just kind of follow Miyazaki around and are sort of studying his process. He is very bitter. He is very hopeless. And I think because so much of his work is about humanity and its relationship with nature, as time has progressed, he has seen that humanity is less and less willing as a collective to do anything about the damage it's doing to the planet. And I think he's become very understandably hopeless
Yeah.
as a result of all of that. And he still's making these movies because he's trying to like at least put something into the world that's the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about the dynamics with the grand uncle and this tower that is set to collapse and the search for the heir, it feels like he's making a comment on his own career and it coming to an end.
It's also like this thing of like how the grand uncle, you're not sure what you're supposed to view him as.
Well, you don't know if he's a hero or a villain. He's a
Exactly.
very mysterious figure, even up to the end of the movie.
And even towards when he's like, "Oh, I've made the blocks like less malice. They're now made of good things." Like Mojito's like, I don't want this."
Well, he says a thing at the end, which is build your own tower to
Yeah.
Mojito. And so I think it's the realization of, I think in Miyazaki's perspective, perhaps it's I keep thinking about how do I keep the legacy of Studio Ghibli alive, but I have to understand it dies with me because it was my thing. I created it. When I go, it goes, and that's so it can make room for someone else's thing.
Yeah.
That it shouldn't be my thing forever. So it's almost an anti-Disney in that this isn't about continuing the legacy of Ghibli, it's about continuing the legacy of the craft. And it doesn't matter what banner or name you put it under, as long as you're continuing the craft of this animation, this style, and this like adherence to creating beautiful works of moving art that push the medium forward. Like we were talking about the impressionism of the fire, and that was like a new visual element I'd never
Yeah.
seen in his work.
It's also that thing of like when Mahito is talking to the grand uncle about it. When he says, "No, I don't want to follow through," he tells him, "So you want to go back to that world that you're from that's full of chaos and danger and ugly things?" And he's like, "But I'll find my friends there."
Mm-hmm.
And like that's when like that was like build your own tower. It's sort of like, okay, yeah, I understand the world is terrible and you want to stay here, but I have friends I need to go check on.
When
That I'm a part
I
of.
saw a quote from a review and I was like, I think that's a perfect summation of the movie. That The Boy and the Heron is about the dreams that hold our world together and the violence that threatens to tear it apart.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. And it's Miyazaki is wrestling with that in this movie where he's like, do I live in my tower separate from the world, just keeping this thing going all the time? Or do I let myself give up and I let it fall apart and I let someone else try? And maybe they're gonna fuck it up. I don't know. But like at a certain point, you can't worry about that because you'll be dead, right? Like, because he's getting there. Like, eventually he's gonna be dead and it won't matter.
And this is the interesting thing of it being because he's gone back and forth between retirement and especially at his age now, most likely this will be his final film. And how it's oddly a touching ending.
Yeah, and it does have some hope. It's also very simple,
Yes.
where it doesn't try to do anything grand with the final scene. It's just kind of, and life goes on, and people keep living, and people keep going. Uh, where do you feel that this ranks in the Ghibli canon? Is there something you would say it's as good as, something you would say it's worse than, or it's not quite as good as?
I honestly, again, I don't think I could put it in that category. What I want to do is maybe read more about the history of Japan during that time period because I feel as if this is going to be a bigger impact once like Miyazaki actually passes away.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is one of those films that we have to revisit to really get into it somehow. Because on first passing, you're kind of like, oh, I've seen this before.
Well, it feels like I was saying, there's a lot of the familiar Ghibli elements, but the deeper you get into it, the more you realize he's making intentional references, but he's trying to do something new with those.
Yeah.
He's talking about his own career
Mhm.
and making movies.
Where do you put it?
I think it, I think a movie like Spirited Away is so standalone good that I don't really think anything can challenge it.
Yeah.
Like it's so complete.
Hmm.
And you don't have to go to anything outside of that movie to enjoy that movie. There's Japanese cultural references that you can go deeper if you want, but you can, I mean, like I know little kids that have watched Spirited Away and love it.
Hmm.
And they don't know anything about Japanese culture.
Yeah.
This one, because of the historical connection, makes me think you do kind of need a little background to full, and also the autobiographical elements of Miyazaki that are in it.
Hmm.
And this isn't necessarily a film that little kids are just going to become enamored with. It is PG-13,
Yeah, it feels like more like
but more grown up.
young adults kind of like standards.
In the same way that like Whisper of the Heart would be something that more like a teenager would enjoy than a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Um, the film made over $294 million in the US, which for a imported
Mhm.
animated movie in December that wasn't made by Disney or DreamWorks Animation is pretty good. And my hope would be, I know because Godzilla Minus One came out at the same time and also had like an incredible American box office, that hopefully they'll start to see more movies like this get imported and wide release into the US.
Yeah.
Like that would be the dream. Uh, is that what's going to happen based on what I've seen the studios and the finance bros that run them do? Probably not. They're going to completely
No.
miss why this worked, and they're going to just go, oh, just more animated movies, and we're going to get more boss babies and trolls
I
and all
think
of
what
that.
it is like right now it seems as if like they don't have anything new going on. It's just gonna be them trying to select movies that will make them all look good, like that they're discovering these people.
Well, I feel like what's going on at the American box office right now is some of the biggest money makers in theaters have been re-released movies like the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Phantom Menace,
Mhm.
and it's not new stuff. And
No.
I would say like I don't think the Phantom Menace is a very good movie at all, but compared to a lot of the spectacle movies coming out now, at least the Phantom Menace is the vision, flawed as it is, of a filmmaker,
Yeah.
as opposed to something that's like some studio executives looked at focus group data and then put together a movie. So yeah, I mean, I would hope that if anything, The Boy and the Heron was the first exposure to some people of a new type of animated movie, and that they'll be curious enough to go seek out more of Miyazaki or more anime and kind of discover those like hidden gems that a lot of the American audience doesn't know. Would you recommend this to our audience?
Yes, I would. Would you?
Oh, easily, yes. Any Miyazaki movie I would recommend. Snatched from the green place of many mothers, young Furiosa falls into the hands of a great biker horde led by the warlord Dementis. Sweeping through the wasteland, they come across the Citadel, presided over by the Immortan Joe. As the two tyrants fight for dominance, Furiosa soon finds herself in a non-stop battle to make her way home. So we watched Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, a prequel follow-up to 2015's Mad Max Fury Road. And this one focuses on, obviously, the character of Furiosa. Um, Before we get into this movie specifically, I want to kind of talk about George Miller and also the Mad Max series. So George Miller, we've watched a ton of this guy's movies. We've of course seen all the Mad Max movies. We've watched the first Happy Feet. We watched Babe, Pig in the City.
Favorite movie. Mhm.
We watched The Witches of Eastwick. We've seen 3,000 Years of Longing, which was his last film. We've seen Lorenzo's Oil. Uh, what do you think of George Miller as a filmmaker, based because you've seen a lot of his work?
I think he does action and chase scenes so well.
Even in Babe and Happy Feet.
Oh yeah, and there is always a little bit of philosophy like sprinkled into it. There's always a little bit of criticism of our day-to-day lives sprinkled into his movies.
He's
And
very clearly an environmentalist,
yes, and he's
but he doesn't get preachy about it.
no.
He's able to fold those ideas into entertaining stories.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I was thinking, like, even I remember there was like a seal chase in Happy Feet where
That
it was like,
was
this feels like a Mad Max chase scene, like
yeah.
where he chooses to put the camera, the intensity and pacing of the scenes. So yeah, very consistent. What do you think of the Mad Max films? Because they're very different from each other, each one of them.
It's okay, it's hard. I think it's weird because I have a little thing in my heart for the Mad Max movies.
What
It
is that little thing in your heart? Is it
it's
a little seed of hate or a little seed of
no,
love?
I think it's love because I think it's just like I watched, I think it was like the third Mad Max
Beyond
movie,
Thunderdome?
like when he's like with the kids.
He's just a raggedy man.
Yeah, I watched
Yep.
that so many times as a child. Specifically the scenes when he's like with the children that were obviously like children of like an
Plane
airplane.
crash survivors
Yeah.
and the way they've like mythologized their own history. Yeah.
Yes. And how like he becomes a parental figure like reluctantly towards these children to protect
And
them.
that movie did kind of feel like a conclusion
Yeah.
because, and Well, do you want to talk about the theory that people have about Fury
Yeah.
Road, and where Thunderdome is the conclusion to that Mad Max? Because there's a theory I read recently, and apparently this has been a theory since Fury Road came out, and I just missed it, was that the Mad Max we see in the movie, played by Tom Hardy, clearly we can see as from the audience point of view, that's a different person. But in the film, there's a lot of fans that think that's actually a different person than Max, I think Rakowski or Rocktaski or what,
Rocktastic.
yeah, something like that, his name. Um, the Australian cop. And there's some clues. I think there's a point where the Tom Hardy Mad Max has like a little winding music box gear thing.
Mhm.
And that is apparently something Max had that he gives to the feral child in Road Warrior. And also, this Mad Max has the Charger, the Dodge Charger, but at the end of Road Warrior, Max loses that car.
Yeah.
And that car is left behind with the I think it's the caravan of people that he's rescued. Like they have the car.
Mhm.
So the idea is that the Max we meet in Fury Road is actually an adult feral child who has kind of taken up the mantle of his hero because Road Warrior is narrated by an elderly feral child thinking back to this moment where he met this man who like changed his life. And I think it's that Tom Hardy he's Mad Max as a title, like a
Yeah.
legacy thing that's handed down. He's now, I'm the lone guy that's going to travel the wasteland. And when I come across people who need help, I will help them because that's what the original Mad Max taught me to do, kind of
Yeah.
a thing. So he's that reluctant hero, kind of like in Kurosawa's like I can't think, Yojimbo,
Yeah.
the sort of uh character Clint Eastwood, the man with no name,
Mhm.
that kind of I am a good person, but I'm also trying to survive in a very brutal world,
Yeah.
and I have to balance the two things. So I think that's an interesting way to look at these new Mad Max movies and make them fit with that trilogy. Of the old Mad Max movies, do you have a particular favorite?
Obviously the third film.
Beyond Thunderdome?
Beyond Thunderdome.
Which a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but there is a considerable group of fans that don't like it that much. They think it's a little too camp.
I think okay, first of all, I was introduced to that as a child.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a perfect child's movie to go into
It is a more family-friendly Max movie than the others. Yeah.
And then
To me, Road Warrior is my favorite because
the second one.
I was introduced to that as a child on TV.
Yeah.
And it still scared the shit out of me.
It's like scary. The first one, it's sort of like only watch it if you're a full-fledged adult. Because it's just gonna fuck you up because it's like you learn that like
It's very bleak and very dark.
It's supposed to be towards the beginning of this world that they've
Well,
set
yeah,
up.
but I like another theory I saw someone have is that the only part of the world that fell apart was Australia and everywhere else is functioning fine. It's just Australia because it's so isolated, fell into chaos, and everybody's just staying away from them. And that would be, it's one of those, would you want to know what a major city looks like in the Mad Max world? Or are you like, no, they have to take place in the wasteland and that's it. You can never go to a city.
I think I would want to know just to see how it would look like, but I think it's also with Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, it is giving you like this feel of, oh, this isn't just a group of warriors all by themselves. They all have to have like a treaty.
There's communities.
There's communities and
And
there's also
factions.
like alignments of being just like, I have this, you need this, I need what you have.
Well, let's talk a little comparatively. One of the things I got from this movie right away is, he is making it very clear this is not a Mad Max movie.
Mhm.
And that is in terms of especially the structure. When it says a Mad Max saga, this movie is a saga. It takes place over decades.
Yeah.
It is the way Fury Road is so contained and tight and like linear and takes place over the course of like a couple days. This is the opposite. It is, we see Furiosa from a child up to the moment that the Fury Road begins.
Yeah.
And in that way, it feels like it really is an epic movie. It spans a lot. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of relationships. We have characters that return that we were introduced to in Fury Road. We have new characters introduced. And it's a lot of movie.
Yeah.
Um, and I clocked in, I think around 2.5 hours long, and it is a full 2.5 hours. What did you think of the scope of this movie compared to Fury Road? Because that's something I think a lot of people are talking about.
Okay, so my issue with this film is I almost wish that it had been like more of a miniseries.
It could have filled like like an HBO series
Yeah.
or something.
And I don't know how I feel about the casting of Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa.
Mhm.
There's just something missing.
Well, one thing that's hard to make a judgment about that over is she doesn't have a lot of dialogue in this movie.
No, she doesn't.
And so it relies on her physical performance and her reactive performance.
Yeah.
When the camera cuts to her after something happens, what do we see in her face and how does it inform us about the character?
She's just kind of boring to look at. And my other issue is like she just is too delicate. Like her facial features is just sort of like, so you're saying
She's
that,
not scarred up in the way that you would expect someone who'd been through all of this to be.
well, like when you think about like Charlize Theron, like within the first movie,
Mhm.
even though she's not scarred up, there is this look of like
There's a grit,
there's a grit about her. There's like this kind of like what the fuck kind of
a sort of
attitude.
world weary, weathered,
Yeah.
jaded. And we see the origins of that, but then the movie kind of rushes a little bit at the
Yeah.
end to get us to the beginning of Fury Road.
And I didn't like, I think I had an issue with her as the main protagonist.
You didn't necessarily believe her as Furiosa.
No, like I believe that the child actor playing
Let's
Furiosa.
Alila Brown as young Furiosa.
So good.
What a performance. And she's in probably at least a third of the film, if not half. Like she is in a lot of this movie and immediately believable.
Yeah.
Every scene she's in.
And I don't know like if they did any digital effects or something like, but there are times that she did look like Anya Taylor-Joy. Like there's just certain looks that she would give that I was just like, are you digitally imposing the same kind of
And it's
eyes?
also for her an even more wordless performance than Anya Taylor-Joy has.
Yeah.
Because she's kind of keeping a tight lip because she doesn't want to tell these bad guys about where she came from or anything. But she's expressing just this boiling rage, like at all times.
Yeah.
Sometimes she looks calmer than others, but there's always this sort of like an engine idling inside her of just like, if given the chance, she would slit all these people's throats in a heartbeat and she wouldn't think twice about it. And so, yeah, that Alila Brown, she's been in another movie that's because of her performance here, it has me interested enough to check it out. And it just came out called Sting, which is apparently the kind of a B monster movie that was also filmed in Australia about I think like a UFO crashes and it causes the spiders in this apartment building to grow to like the size of dogs.
Okay.
So it's the people fighting off these spiders, and she's the sort of little girl who's at the center of the movie. I think in real life she's 14 or 15 years old. She's probably 13 around the time she filmed it. But she's got one of those like kid actor looks that she could play like 10 and be believable.
And I think they did a pretty good thing about the shots. Like the shots with her were mostly like over the head, so she looked small most of the time.
They always make her look tiny. Yeah.
They like he knew how to shoot this character, like this actress, to be like, okay, this is a child who feels at times like a feral child.
But like, we know she isn't necessarily because we get a glimpse of where she came from.
Yeah.
But she's clearly been trained that when she's in the presence of outsiders, you don't show them any mercy, especially if they're being cruel to you.
Yeah, and like I thought like it was this interesting also the idea of like Furiosa's mother, like Mary, going like batshit crazy to go find her kid.
Well, that actress, Charlie Fraser, also has a very almost no dialogue role.
Yeah.
And for a supporting role that's maybe just in the first like opening act of the movie, very memorable.
Yes.
Like I will remember that performance. She is so good, like the intensity she brings too. There's one big role that I would almost argue kind of overshadows Anya Taylor-Joy in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what it is? It's Chris Hemsworth as Dementus.
He did a very good job. Like he was like excellent at this.
A fantastic villain.
Yes.
where we're given just enough backstory to kind of get him, but not too much that he loses what makes him scary. He clearly has had children. They
Yeah.
were killed in some way as part of the collapse of society because he carries a Winnie the Pooh, like an actual A.A. Milne style Winnie the Pooh teddy bear on chains on him.
Yeah.
And at one point he gives it to little Furiosa because he sees her as like his protege
Mhm.
because he's delusional and doesn't understand this child hates him and wants to kill him. She witnesses her mother being crucified by him. Uh, and he's great because he is so.
It's not crucified. She's pulled
That's
apart,
a
like,
yeah,
yeah.
crucifixion, yeah.
Yeah.
Crucifixion, yeah, crucifixion. Yeah, she's torn apart limb from limb.
Yeah.
And that's the violence in this movie is pretty harrowing. Like he knows how to go right up to the line and not completely show it to you, but still show you enough that like you're
Yeah.
unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
And it also continues to remind us how brutal this vision of the future is. This truly is a future where man has reverted to almost animal status.
Which is funny because like at the beginning of the film, there's like radio static of like television and stuff like that. It's like woke propaganda finally just got
Yeah.
So you can tell that he's kind of like, yeah, you're gonna take it however you want at this film, but I'm just letting you know that I don't fucking agree with the guys that really love this.
Yeah, where it's this almost trying to remind and I think that's why he probably chose to do Furiosa is by doing another Mad Max, he would almost kind of provide more fodder to these dude bros that don't get his work.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm gonna feature a female protagonist and make it very hard for you, which is maybe where some of the negative reviews are coming from,
Yeah.
right? Sequences in this movie that like immediately pop out in your head because set pieces are a big George Miller thing.
I really liked like the Word Man, that guy that had like a ton of information that was like tattooed on his
Oh, he was like the
body.
history man.
Yes.
Yes.
I thought that was such an interesting thing because it felt like he was giving like what was it
He
like
was like a Merlin kind
like
of figure.
Hemsworth's like information about where they were.
Yeah, what he essentially was is he is a neurodivergent man, probably autistic, who has a very good memory and pattern recognition, but in a world where all of that has been mystified,
Yeah.
he's now an old wise man, which
Yeah.
reminds us that the old wise men and shaman of the past were probably neurodivergent people. Like, who else is going to be able to keep up with an oral tradition in a society with no written language?
Yeah, and like
someone where that's their fixation,
and
right?
at some point, like when Furiosa is still a child, he's like, "Oh, you can become a word man like me," and then he's like telling her, like, "You need to become like
You have to make yourself invaluable.
invaluable to him in order to live," because what she's feeling right now is that all she's sensing is like he's gonna treat her like as if it was like an adopted daughter, which she wants nothing to do with until like her escape is formalized.
I really loved because it was something, and that's the thing I love about Miller and his world building in these movies is he will present you with a character who's so specific, and the minute you hear their name and you see them, you already understand some of the history. And one of those is the Octoboss, who, when we meet Dementis, there's this guy who's wearing this garish black horned like outfit. He's one of the motorcycle riders, and we learn quickly at some point he formed an alliance with Dementis. Dementis is kind of in charge, but Octoboss kind of has his own biker crew.
Yeah.
Because Dementis ends up sacrificing those guys in an ambush that are the Octobus's men, which pisses him off. And then later, when Furiosa is operating the war rig for Immortan Joe, she goes up against the Octoboss and his crew, and Dementis is not a part of it. And so, just with that, you're told a piece of history in the world, but he never has to have a title crawl. He never has to have characters vomit up exposition that doesn't feel natural. It's you, as the viewer, are expected to pay attention to details. And if you do, you'll easily put things together and understand them.
Yeah, and I did like the explanation of the war rig, which is like just going to accumulate like gasoline or whatever it is that they need.
Well, but I love that Immortan Joe, because you think there's the dichotomy of Bullet Town, Gas Town, and the Citadel. And it's essentially recreating the very fundamentals of an economy.
Mm-hmm.
You have weapons, you have fuel, and Immortan Joe provides water and food.
Yeah.
And with those things, you can form the basics of a civilization. It's not going to be a great civilization, because when you look at the fuel and the bullets part, that's a pretty fucked up part of things. But I love that the war rig, every time we would cut to the interior of that big tanker, it was just fruits and vegetables. And it feels like it's not what you expect when you see this like armored truck with all these war boys on it, like with spears that have explosives on the end of them.
I also like the explanation of the war boys, because like it's not as if
It's a
like
cult.
Yeah, it's a cult, but it's also like a group of people that you hire to go with you on these missions.
But it's not just that, it's and like you're saying, yeah, we do get a better understanding of how the Citadel functions.
Yeah.
Immortan Joe realized the most valuable thing to have at his disposal would be warriors who would mindlessly die for him.
Yeah.
So the War Boys are a religious cult in which Immortan Joe is their spiritual leader, and he promises them Valhalla if they die.
Yeah, and he also provides them with the drugs that keep them like fucking numb and keep doing anything that they need to do.
Because there's that great scene where he shows off to Dementis, where I'm going to beat you and there's no way you can beat me. When he just tells a war boy, are you ready to, like, oh, I forget the phrase that they use. Are you ready to like show yourself to me? And the war boy goes, yes. He sprays his face with the paint. And then he just jumps off a ledge to his death. And then Immortan Joe just kind of gets back on the mic, and Dementis is like, now you see, like, all of these boys up here will do whatever I tell them. Will your people do the same? And Dementis, because clearly we see with the Octoboss and all this, Dementis's life is constantly putting out fires to keep this very motley crew of people together, or he has no power, and they hate each other.
Yeah, they do. They can't stand each other. Mind you, it's not as if like Immortan Joe like has a solid group. His sons are just
fuck ups. There was Rictus Erectus, the big one, who what I liked was the weird predatory way he is with even like little Furiosa, but I like how the movie doesn't, like, Miller is also sensitive enough to go, I'm not going to get explicit with this. You're not going to see him like trying to fuck her, but I'm going to be able to imply things so you're like, oh, first of all, I think this guy has arrested development. He probably has the mind of a child, right? And he sees this pretty girl and he wants to take her from his father. Because that's another thing, is that Immortan Joe sees little Furiosa and is like, oh, we can grow you up and then you can become one of my wives. But Furiosa like is able to dodge all these like predatory bullets. And then there were other details like Elsa Pataki, Chris Hemsworth's wife, plays Mr. Norton is the character's name, who's one of these, and it's one of like the brutal scenes where we're introduced to Dementis, is he's just defeated a rival biker gang. And they have all his like foot soldiers. And he tells them, whoever can get to these 5 bikes that your leader is chained to, and then drive the bikes away and dismember your leader, you join my crew. Then he just lets all of these bikers murder each other. And the ones that survive get to the bikes and then kill the guy who was their leader like moments before in order to not be executed themselves. And her character in fighting gets like her face sliced up, so she can't ever fully close her mouth, and it's like a permanent, almost Two-Face sneer. And her teeth are bared, and it's just such a disturbing look on this person. And she shows up constantly as part of Dementis's crew. We were talking about set pieces. We actually talked about Tom Burke.
Oh, he was great though.
But I forget his name, but he was essentially Furiosa's lover.
No, they just became friends.
Are you sure? I thought I felt definitely romantic. There was a romantic thing there. And he's the Imperator before her, the one who drives the war.
Jack or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And he's in charge of the war rig first, and she basically inherits the war rig after. Jack, of course, he's not in Fury Road, so I'm gonna let you guess what happens to him. The set piece, that ambush on Gastown, or is it Bullet Town that they went to? I don't know. It was one of the towns. That was the ambush set piece.
I think it was Gastown because they came back without gas, and that's when
and I thought it was really well done, because that's the scene where Furiosa has to end up, which causes her to have to get her prosthetic.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really well done scene because there's that constant rising, falling action of, oh, it looks like Furiosa is going to get hit. Oh, oh no, Dementis. And so you don't know how that scene is going to end until it finally comes to its end. Uh, there was what I really loved about this movie, and the more I think about it, the more I like it, and the more I think I might raise my rating from a 3.5 to a 4, just because I'm not entertained by most action movies, and this action movie kept my attention from start to finish. I never got bored with it. And I like that Miller takes his time to establish characters, their relationships with each other, yet the movie never feels slow. It always feels fast-paced. And that's something you don't see a lot of action directors able to pull off. It's either unhinged, ramped up action scenes, and then everything stops dead in the water so we can have all these talking scenes to establish relationships with people and do the interpersonal drama, and then set piece. Miller folds these things into each other. And so action set pieces also become character development moments. And what seems like calm character development moments are filled with world building and things that are visually engaging. And so you really, for a 2.5 hour movie, while it does feel like a long movie with a lot of things, you're happy to be there.
Yeah.
You're not like looking at your watch wondering when this thing's going to be over. You're happy to see like where we're going to go next and how Miller is going to surprise you by introducing an old element from Fury Road and showing you how that works its way into Furiosa's life. Is there anything else about the movie that stood out to you?
I mean, again, we didn't end up talking about Tom Burke too much. About his
It's a very muted
performance.
role, and it's really not in that much of the movie. It's more for Furiosa, it's a crucial moment in her life.
Yeah.
More than him as a character, really.
Yeah. And also her getting an alliance of what her future is going to look like without having to bargain up or give anything. Because when she does finally go like, okay, no, I'll take you with me. It is a last thing that they can do together.
Because he's the first person to know that she is female because she's disguising herself as a man among the war boys, as like a mechanic. And he just accepts that to him, that doesn't really matter. And I love that we never get a scene where she has to go to a Morton Joe and get approval.
Yeah.
It's just, she proved herself in the field, Imperator Jack speaks up for her, and that's it. And we don't need to see that scene. And it also is the moment where Furiosa realizes, I don't have to fall back to being a victim of these men that I was terrified of becoming ever since I was a little kid. And
he also, the way that he tells her, like, I'll give you the skills and you'll be able to go wherever you want to go.
Yeah, so you don't have to stay at the Citadel. Almost, you can become a female Mad Max.
Yeah.
However, I agreed with what I saw someone say, is that this makes Fury Road look like the epilogue. When you think about it, and it really is like, this is most of Furiosa's story, and then Fury Road is like the little end note that wraps it up. But when you think about the end of Fury Road, she returns to the Citadel, and it appears as though she's going to become the leader of the Citadel because Morton Joe's dead and they're all gone by Fury Road. Now that we know Furiosa's story and how she ended up here, do we feel that makes sense as an end place for her? Or do we feel like she wouldn't stay as leader of the Citadel? She would become a female Max and go out into the world.
I feel like she would take over the Citadel because it was just sort of like the place that she wanted to go to is essentially gone.
Been destroyed by it, yeah.
But she can remake it at the Citadel.
That's the same thought I had, is that the Citadel, now that we've seen what the Green Place was, and it essentially was a less violent and more egalitarian version of the Citadel is its shadow self. All the resources, but the cost is very heavy. The Green Place, we don't see it very much, but the vibe was very much that everybody kind of shared the labor. It was like a communist place.
They just made sure that outsiders stayed outside.
Yeah. Or that you would have to really know if you could trust that person before you would allow them to join.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does feel that Fury Road brings Furiosa full circle, where she's now the leader. That she was always supposed to be a leader, and she just kind of had to learn what kind of leader she wanted to be by watching all these men fail at it.
Yeah.
Do we think there will be another Mad Max movie? We talked about Miyazaki, he's 83. George Miller is 79. And Furiosa and Fury Road were both ideas he had back at the beginning of the 2000s.
And he wanted to film
Furiosa first.
like back to back, but could not get the funding.
Yeah. So the Furiosa only made $171 million at the box office. So it's considered a financial failure.
Even though
I think it made more than I think Fury Road's budget was less and it made less than this. But it's the weird Hollywood accounting where if you don't make $1 billion and you're a widescreen release, then like you're a failure.
Yeah.
Do we think George Miller will revisit Mad Max ever
I
again?
don't know. I don't know if he's gonna pull out a hat trick, manage to do it again, or if he's just gonna want to do something else.
Well, if he does come back, do we want him to visit another character in this world? Do we want him to go back to Furiosa? Do we want to see Max again? Or do we think this world shouldn't be touched anymore?
I think it's okay if the world is left as it is.
I think it's
we're edging too close to it anyway.
the thing that I fear most is that when George Miller dies, they try to reboot Mad Max and do some kind of Star Wars Marvel franchise shit.
Yeah.
And it feels so Australian. Like the names, like the Octoboss and the Organic Mechanic, Scrotus, Rictus Erectus, Dr. Dementus. These are very odd names, and they kind of fit what I know from a distance of the sort of quirky Australian dark sense of humor. And he's kind of been doing this since the first movie, like The Knight Rider, and things like that. Or like Master Blaster from your favorite one, Thunderdome. So I just don't see anyone else being able to do this. You know what would be the nightmare scenario for me?
What?
Of who they could put in charge of this franchise? Who's not Australian, but geographically very close and has been a very successful film director? Taika Waititi.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that would suck so bad. Yeah. Like, he's somebody who, between the diminishing returns of his very redundant kind of meme work, but then his support of Israel is just like, yeah, dude, I'm not interested in what you have to say anymore. Especially when he claims to support indigenous people, but then won't acknowledge Gazans, or not Gazans, Palestinians.
Well, he said that if people don't care about like the Maori people, why would he care about like other people? Which is
a very capitalist way of thinking, right? Like it's one of those where I think people need to realize, yeah, just because you're indigenous doesn't necessarily mean you're a good person. We have to, what is your relation of your indigenous culture to other indigenous cultures? And clearly he's been caught up in the colonization, capitalism crap. But yeah, that's what I would fear. They would hand it to him.
Fingers.
Or it's Warner Brothers, so James Gunn in charge of Mad Max. Like, it's a little better than Waititi, but I don't think I could do it. Would you recommend Furiosa to our wide audience? And let's say people who haven't seen Fury Road or a Mad Max movie.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. It's fun.
Yeah, I think you could watch it and it's fun. And even if you don't know the other movies, you're not going to be lost at all. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for all the important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you are subscribed to be notified when new episodes come up wherever it is you listen to this podcast. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find a lot more reviews. We're currently doing a series here in July, Ernest Saves the Summer, where we painfully watched through all of the Ernest films and are reviewing them while also kind of sharing bits about the life of actor Jim Varney, who played Ernest. And then later in July, we'll be doing 1980s fantasy worlds on film. If you enjoy what we do on the podcast and over on the blog, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have several reward levels for you to pick from. We want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who both donate at the writer's room level. No matter what level you donate to at the Patreon, you will get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We're going to be wrapping up a tabletop roleplay series Ariana and I have been doing soon. And then after that, we're going to be starting a mini-series on romantic comedies, going all the way from the 1940s up to present day. Next week on the podcast, we'll be reviewing the deconstructed slasher film in a violent nature. as well as Jeff Nichols' ode to Marlon Brando in the 1960s with The Bike Riders. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.